Claire, and thanks Claire for introducing me there, and thanks to everyone for attending. So just to introduce myself, I'm Róisín Leahy. I'm a final year PhD student in the Centre for Injury Prevention Performance in the School of Health and Performance in DCU. And my undergrad is in athletic therapy. So I have experience in dealing with concussion as a clinician, and I've also been researching it for the last few years. I originally became interested in concussion in ladies football after dealing with concussions in players during my undergrad, and I found at the time that there wasn't much research in female players in particular, so that's where my interest stems from really. So like I said, I'm a final year PhD student. My PhD has been supported by the Irish Research Council and the LGFA. We've also worked with UPMC Ireland. I've focused on trying to improve how we can recognise and manage concussion in ladies football. And I've been working with Dr. Siobhan O'Connor, Dr. Enda White and Dr. Keith Rochford on this for the last few years. And tonight we've put together a webinar aimed at players and coaches and anyone else involved in or interested in the sport, mainly to help you become more confident in recognising and managing concussion in players. So I'll start off by explaining what a concussion is and why it's important to be able to recognise and manage it, and then I'll go through practical tips for players and coaches. So the first thing is, it's important to remember that ladies football, it's a deliberate non-contact sport, but there still is contact. And when there's contact, there's going to be contact injuries such as concussion that's inevitable to a certain extent. However, concussion is treatable, and there's a lot we can do to minimize the risks associated with it and treat the symptoms. So you might be wondering, what exactly is a concussion? So a concussion is a type of mild traumatic brain injury. This means that it's caused by a force acting on the brain. This force can be a direct force, so a player hits their head directly, or an indirect force, which can be caused if a player falls or is tackled. So the impact is applied to a different part of the body, but it can still sometimes travel to the brain. Concussion mainly affects how the brain functions. It doesn't actually cause physical brain damage, so a player with a scan won't show up bleeding or bruising of the brain. And in most cases, a concussion is temporary and short term. So symptoms generally resolve with rest within a month or so. There is a subset of players who suffer more prolonged symptoms, which we'll get into later. As part of my PhD, we carried out a survey in 2020 of about 650 adult ladies footballers. So we were surveying them about the 2019 season. We included all counties in Ireland, so players from across Ireland, and a combination of inter-county and club level players. And we found that 10% of them said they'd been diagnosed with concussion during the previous year. That would be the 2019 season. And a further 8%, they thought they sustained a concussion, but they never sought medical care. So in this case, they fell or they got a hit to the head, and they experienced symptoms such as headache or dizziness afterwards, but they never actually went to the doctor about it. So it wasn't technically confirmed. Now, of this 10%, 24% returned to play in the same day, which you'll find out later actually shouldn't be done at all. And 46% didn't follow the return to play program. So the return to play program is the standard protocol for concussion. There's a few areas we can obviously work on here with concussion management. So some people, you might think that because concussions do generally resolve with rest, you may wonder, why is it important that I'm able to recognize and manage them? There are a few reasons for this. So firstly, you will have 10 to 15% of players who experience more prolonged symptoms. Sometimes players with a history of certain medical conditions such as ADHD, mood disorders or migraine, they may be more likely to fall into this category. So if you or a player does have that sort of medical history, it's just something to be aware of, that it's not uncommon for you to take a bit longer than to recover from a concussion. So the symptoms obviously associated with concussion, they're quite debilitating. They impact sports as well as academic and work activities and social life. There's also an increased risk of injury in the initial period following concussion. So this could be a risk of sustaining an additional concussion or a risk of sustaining another musculoskeletal injury. And finally, this is particularly relevant to ladies football. Female players have a slightly increased risk of having a longer recovery than males, so it's particularly important for this group. Another reason in ladies football it's important that coaches and players are aware of how to recognise a concussion is that being an amateur sport, obviously most teams don't have regular access to a doctor, an athletic therapist or a physio. So whether or not a player gets proper care depends to a large extent on whether the player herself and the people around her are able to recognise she may have a concussion. So I talked to Laurie Ryan, the captain of the Clare team. So she had a bad concussion a few years ago in 2019, I think. And she just spoke to me about how it affected not just sport, but other aspects of her life as well. So she, her main symptoms were headaches, drowsiness. She had visual problems. She couldn't concentrate. She was sensitive to light and noise. So she wasn't able to work because she couldn't concentrate. She said because it was difficult for her to watch the ball, she couldn't even go and watch training. And even working on a phone or computer or anything like that was aggravating to her. So she says here, so basically lying down in a room was kind of the bones of what it could do. So you can see how much it can affect someone, not just sport, but other aspects of their life as well. Now you know why it's important to be able to recognize a concussion. You need to know how. The first thing is to make sure that a player doesn't have actually a more serious injury. So you want to look out for red flag signs. If a player has any of these signs, they should go to hospital immediately because they could also be a sign of a more serious injury, so more serious brain injury or a spinal cord injury. The red flag signs include neck pain or tenderness, double vision, weakness or burning in the arms or legs, a severe or worsening headache, seizure, loss of consciousness, deteriorating conscious state, vomiting, and becoming restless or agitated. Symptoms are what a player will feel herself. They won't necessarily be very obvious to other people. There's typically there's 4 categories that concussion symptoms broadly fit into. They're cognitive, physical, emotional, and sleep related. So a player might have symptoms in one category or all of them or in several of them. There's no clear way a concussion will develop. It's also really important to realize that concussion is an injury that evolves over time. So the symptoms or all the symptoms might not be immediately present after the incident occurs. They develop over minutes or hours or sometimes even a day or two later. So cognitive symptoms relate to the mind, include difficulty concentrating or remembering, fatigue, feeling to slow down or in a fog. Physical symptoms include headache, neck pain, nausea, dizziness, vision problems, sensitivity to light or noise, or just a feeling of not being right. Emotional symptoms include irritability, sadness, nervousness or anxiety, and just feeling more emotional generally. And finally, sleep-related symptoms be drowsiness, difficulty falling asleep, or sleeping more or less than usual. And in comparison to symptoms, signs are how a player acts. So these are things that would be obvious to other players or coaches or onlookers. And depending how bad the concussion is, the player might not be aware of all these herself. The main signs include poor balance or a loss of coordination. She may be clutching her head, have slurred speech. She might have a vacant or dazed facial expression, vomiting, or loss of consciousness. So once you think there has a concussion, you need to know what to do in the initial stages. So a player with a concussion, they should stop playing immediately and seek medical assistance. So this could be from a doctor, an athletic therapist, or physiotherapist. They should also take mental and physical rest for the first day or two following the incident. So physical rest, obviously rest from sport, mental rest, take a break from work or school. It's also really important to minimize time using screens. Players absolutely should not return to play on the day of injury. They should avoid alcohol or using any sort of drugs which might obscure the symptoms. And they absolutely should not drive home. So once this initial period of rest is complete, the player can start the return to play protocol with guidance of a medical professional. So this is a multi-stage protocol which allows the player to gradually increase their activity from rest to full gameplay in a very controlled manner. So she'll start off with the stages coming up in orange here, starting with really light activities, so walking, and then moving up to, say, running drills, and then finally more complex drills. And it's important to that the player, if she experiences aggravation of any symptoms at any of these stages, that she drops back to the previous level and goes through that again. So when she's okay doing non-contact training, she should get another medical assessment, and she can be cleared to full contact training then if the medical professional thinks she's ready for it. And then normal match play is the final stage. So the LGFA guidelines recommend that it should take at least 15 days to pass through all these stages. There's also a similar protocol for returning to school for younger athletes. So again, it starts with rest, then the player can start building in cognitive activities that don't provoke symptoms. So this could be as little as 5 or 10 minutes a day of reading or using screens. If this is okay, she can start doing school activities outside the classroom, so homework or reading. And then she may want to return to school part-time first, so just not do full days or take extra breaks. And then finally, she'll be able to return to school full-time. There's no equivalent for returning to work, but the same principles can be applied. And the link at the bottom of this page here has all the concussion guidelines I just went through, if anyone's interested in looking at them later. So Ava Rutledge from the Dublin team, she spoke to me about how she felt it was really important that coaches and managers are understanding of concussion. So she found she had really understanding coaches, which helped her in her recovery. She thought it was really important that coaches are aware not only of how to manage it, but that the recovery can take a while. It's not always linear, and just because a player looks okay, she may not be okay. So she pointed out to me that a lot of times she found, because concussion wasn't visible to other people, people tended to forget she had a concussion. So she thought that because she wasn't limping around, people thought she was all right. So she, although her coaches were really good, she acknowledged that if a coach didn't understand that it can take a while to recover from concussion, that might not be helpful. So we mentioned earlier the 10 to 15% of players who'll have prolonged symptoms. So most people will go through the return to play program and they will be recovered by the end of it. Some people may need just a bit of extra help, and we usually treat this by targeting treatment based on what type of symptoms they have. So again, we've our 4 categories of concussion symptoms, and there's a lot of things you can do, but I've just given some examples here. I'll go through 2 in more detail now in a minute. And so yeah, the treatment should be targeted towards the player based on what kind of symptoms she has. So Ava had really bad headaches that lasted for months following concussion. And she found that even though she went through the return to play protocols, she kept getting stuck. I suppose like when she reached a certain stage, really bad headaches would return, and she went back and forth loads of times, and just months later was still getting really bad headaches. So she ended up getting multidisciplinary treatment from a variety of different experts. So she got a course of migraine medication. She received medicinal Botox into her neck muscles, and she worked with physios on neck stretching and strengthening as well. And in combination, all these things gradually helped her. So she says here, and probably after 2 months or maybe 6 or 7 weeks in, I gradually got back training. So the lesson here is that although she had really a bad concussion and prolonged symptoms, she was able to manage it once she got the right treatment. And similarly, Laurie Ryan got vestibular therapy. So vestibular therapy treats the kind of symptoms she had, such as dizziness, poor balance, and visual problems. And she was able to therefore build back up to sport-specific skills. So one she mentioned to me was she had her back to the clinician. She had to turn around, catch a ball, throw it back, and then jump back around. She did various single leg balance work as well. And even though this is really easy normally to an elite athlete, she found it really difficult after the concussion. She said here, initially I used to leave there crying every day because it was so hard. I was working in slow motion. But similar to Ava, over time, she began to see improvements, and now she's back. The treatment worked. So I guess a positive message from these two cases is that even if the symptoms of concussion seem really bad and they seem to be going on for a long time, it can be treated. Whereas a more traditional approach is that if rest doesn't improve your symptoms, there's kind of nothing you can do. That's not really considered correct anymore, and there's actually lots you can do. And just to wrap all of that up, so concussions are inevitable really in ladies football. However, they're also treatable. And it's really important that everyone involved knows how to recognise signs and symptoms of a possible concussion. And if you think a player has a concussion, they should stop playing immediately. They should seek medical attention, so from a doctor, an athletic therapist, or a physiotherapist. They should take a day or two of mental and physical rest, and then they can progress to a return to play program with guidance from a medical professional. And if they have prolonged symptoms and they need extra help, they can get special treatment depending on what their symptoms are. Right, so that's the end of this part. I'll take questions now. I don't know what way you want to do this, Claire.
Yeah, thanks very much, Róisín. That was great, really informative. I think it gives everybody a real feel of what concussion is, and it can vary between, somebody can get a knock and be back playing with a return to play protocol within the week, and other people it just takes a bit of delayed. So it's important that we take it serious as both players and coaches, and there is advice out there. So I think you did a really good job, so thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I suppose that's what we're here to take. If anybody has any questions on concussion or anything you learned tonight, if you want to just pop it into the chat, Róisín's happy to answer any of them. I'll just give people a few minutes, Róisín, to see if anybody has any questions for you. Róisín, I've got a question coming in here now.
Do you want me to stop sharing actually?
No, it's fine. Just you can keep that up. That's probably the best way to do it.
Okay. No problem.
Somebody's come in to say, who is the best person to go to if you think you've got a concussion?
Like in the immediate aftermath, anyone like a GP or an athletic therapist or a physio, I guess someone who understands sport is probably, better than someone who doesn't. I don't want to say don't go to a GP, but say if there's a physio who's familiar with sport, an orthotic therapist, even if they don't work with your team, they may be a good starting point.
Good stuff. So somebody that knows, but more than likely probably your GP. Róisín, is that what you would recommend?
Yeah, anyone. So like as I said, most people will be okay with the return to play protocol, but if you prolong symptoms, you then may need referral to someone else. But yeah, definitely a GP, athletic therapist, physiotherapist is a good starting point.
Are there symptoms same for all the age groups? Oh, that's a good one. I coach under 12, and I would just want to know if the symptoms would be the same, similar, or different for that younger age group compared to adults.
Yeah, I don't think there should be much difference in like the type of symptoms they're getting. In underage players, like the symptoms will generally, it takes them a bit longer to recover than adults, but yeah, it should be the same kind of symptoms. I suppose maybe if they're quite young, they might find it hard to explain certain symptoms, like the vestibular type symptoms, like just not feeling right, your vision being off. I suppose it might be difficult for a child to verbalize that. So maybe that's something to take into account.
Yeah, how they actually communicate it with you across anything. Symptoms will be the same, but it's trying to get the right message from the kids.
Yeah.
There's another one in. We're on a roll now, Róisín. If dizziness clears after a few seconds, is this a concussion? How long do symptoms last to distinguish between concussion and dizziness for a few seconds?
So dizziness after like a fall or an impact, I assume.
I presume it's after an impact.
Yeah. There's like this dispute on this among experts. So some would say that any kind of dizziness is a concussion. I think it's definitely get it checked out. Like I said, there's not agreement over this, but yeah, get it checked out just to be sure.
Even if it's dizziness, get it checked out just to better.
Yeah, just to be sure. Yeah.
Thanks, Róisín. It was an excellent presentation. Is there anything that a player can do to prevent or migrate the risk of concussion? As my experience is that once a person gets a concussion, they tend to be more susceptible to further concussions as they move on.
Yeah, no, that's true. If you get one, it does increase the risk slightly of subsequent concussions. Like I suppose like some sports try to change the rules to reduce concussions. Other than that, there's some research that looks at like improving neck strength. So people with stronger necks may be able to, if they get a hit to the head, kind of control the force more. So maybe that's something that will come in the future. Other than that, I'd say that like it's just the fact that getting one increases your risk of another. That means it's really important to manage. If a player gets one concussion, it's really important to manage it well, because if they manage it well, they're probably going to get a reduced risk of getting more. Whereas if they go back playing straight away, it could just increase the risk of further concussion. So that's the best I can do with that.
Róisín, I don't know if you know this either, but is there head equipment available which limits the possibility of concussion?
So like standard helmets, actually, they haven't been shown to reduce the risk of concussion because, as I was saying at the start, it's more of a functional disturbance. So a helmet is good for preventing, say, a fracture or a bleed, like a serious injury, but they're not really effective for concussion. I do know like there's some people who sell helmets or headgear that claim to reduce concussion. I know there was like a rugby one out a few years ago, and I looked into it because I was curious, but I think they were really kind of overstating what it could do, because they had only studied this, I think, in animals, but then they were kind of extrapolating on the study in animals to say it could reduce concussion in humans. But at the moment, there isn't really anything. I know there's people working on it, but I would just be cautious of people claiming.
Yeah, I suppose your answer is really at the minute there's nothing with real proven record, especially
exactly
in Gaelic games that
you
would be able to recommend. There's another one here, and I know it's probably something we are working on at the minute. Is it possible to get a summary card that highlights the signs and symptoms of concussion, which could be given to young female players or parents?
Yeah, so for part of my PhD, like I'm producing education materials like this webinar, but we're going to do a handout, and when this is all done, it'll be available on the LGFA website. So it shouldn't be too long.
It shouldn't be too long, folks. So we should have that all up there in our resources as soon as it's ready. We'll have it up there on the website, and we'll do a press release, and it'll be on our social media. So always keep going back to the website and checking. I think is probably the best way to keep in loon with that. What should I be looking for in the 5 minutes after a clash or a fall? Róisín, should neck pain and dizziness appear, and what about dilated pupils?
So just like what symptoms will be most immediate, is that?
I presume if you hear, I don't know, I'm reading from that, if that clash is taking place and you're getting neck pain and dizziness, it's straight off and straight to the doctors, because it seems like it is quite a clear.
Yeah.
My daughter has 3 in 2 months and has taken 5 weeks out and going for short jogs now and still gets bad headaches. How long will this continue for roughly?
It's hard to say if she's if it's going on for that long. She might be just in the group who needs more kind of targeted treatment. Like I went through Ava's treatment with the headache, so maybe it'd be worth going to like a headache specialist or something like that. Generally, yeah, so most people, 80–85% will recover within a month. So if you're finding, you know, a good few weeks have passed and you're still stuck, then I would see if you could go to a specialist for, in this case, a headache specialist.
Róisín, how my daughter has, how can a player access additional treatments? My daughter has suffered a head injury during a game last summer and has still experienced some concussion symptoms. None of these treatments that you have talked about today have been suggested by a GP or her consultant.
I would imagine you could ask a GP to refer you on. I'm not sure how. Well, I know Ava worked with the doctors with the Dublin team, so that's how they had really good links. So yeah, I would ask a GP or even again, an athletic therapist or a physiotherapist, if she's going to one, if they're able to refer her to someone else.
Yeah, and maybe look up some of the, we're recording this tonight, it'll be uploaded to our YouTube, so maybe take the name of a couple of them treatments that Róisín looked for and look up maybe if there's a specialist in your area, or ask your GP to refer it on. If her symptoms are similar to the headache of Ava's, some of them treatments might work.
I think if say if it's a GP who isn't interested in sport, they might not, like the stuff I put on today is quite kind of recent in the last few years, whereas the traditional approach was just rest on the return to play program. So I guess a GP not interested in sport mightn't
be aware of them.
Yeah, but I'm sure they could still refer someone on.
There's another, who is responsible for managing immediate care and recording incidents? I'll take that if you want, Róisín.
Yeah.
If it's a head injury in ladies football, the game is supposed to stop and the player's supposed to be taken off, but that would be by the responsibility of the coach or the manager of the team. All referees, once it's a head injury, would take a note of the player's name for their match report, and then they would usually put it into their match report to the county board afterwards. But the responsibility does lie with the coach and the management of the team, where the player is involved, to ensure, especially if there's a knock in the head, to take the player off. Unfortunately, from what we see, is a lot of players do continue when they shouldn't. I'm just seeing, is there a few more? Is there guiding principles to remove a player in the event of an impact injury to the head? Risk is the player says they're okay and are not, so we need to take the decision away from them. Very clear and helpful presentation, Róisín, thank you. I think, Maureen, that's probably the same as the last one. The team manager and the coaches, once it's a head injury, should be taking the player off. And if they have teams, most teams at any level now usually have a physiotherapist with them, or somebody on the line acting as their first aider, and that would be their call. somebody's asking there about under 12. Look, it's the same as adult. If you can have a nurse or a first aider, usually there's a female liaison officer with them. If you can have that person trained up in first aid, nearly all clubs will ask to have a first aid present with each team. No matter if you're under 8 or senior, should be a first aid or somebody there that has first aid knowledge if they're taking a team or in and along the management of the team. Just seeing if there's anything else, Róisín. That's Jog's injury. That seems to be all at the minute. Folks, referees, like everybody else, have the basics of what concussion is, but again, the responsibility doesn't actually lie on the referees. It lies on the coach or the management of that team. If there's a head injury, the referee will ask the player or the management, and if a referee sees a player maybe acting dizzy or suspicious, they'll always stop the game again and ask the coach to take them off. That they believe that maybe that player isn't going well, but unfortunately, it's within the power for the players and the coaches and the managers to do that. Brilliant. Siobhan's come in there, guys. I know a couple of people have talked about parents saying that their children have had prolonged symptoms of concussion, and Siobhan's come in here to tell us that the UPMC concussion clinic could be an option too for those who are acquiring if they have a child with prolonged symptoms above. So that's the UPMC concussion clinic, and I presume you can Google that for further information. Have you heard of that, Róisín?
Yeah. Okay. You know, that's a good idea. Just like, yeah, even Google concussion treatments in Ireland and you'll probably get, I'm sure you'll get good leads.
Thank you. Anybody else, anything else? Other than that, Róisín, thanks very much. As you can see there, it sparked a lot of, I think it's definitely a topic that people want more information on. It sparked a lot of conversation there tonight. We have a big audience in this evening listening up. So hopefully people took away with a bit of information, and we can help share it. And we're all really excited in Ladies Football with the new information that Róisín's going to deliver to us in terms of them little handy leaflets and things, and hopefully posters that we can get up in all clubs and just create a bit more awareness around concussion. So thank you very much, Róisín, for all your work.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks everybody for logging in and listening. We really appreciate it. Any other messages for us, Róisín, before we leave?
Just thanks to everyone for attending. Hopefully you learned something.
I think they definitely did. So thanks everybody. That's super. Have a great evening.